This is Kyle Hunter and Elijah Fleming from Don't Mean Nothin, and we're back with Pat Gallagher. Pat, thank you for being back on with us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Absolutely. So we wanted to get back in touch with you because we really enjoyed your first interview.
As did I.
And we've developed a good relationship, I feel like, as friends since doing that. And so it's always good to see you, obviously. But also to pick your brain some more about your experience.
Okay.
And some of the things we wanted to talk about, I know you have a list of topics. The one I wanted to start with is one of the most interesting things we've talked about of recent time, and that's the program that you've been doing in the past few years with painting soldiers and with vets and helping them with their PTSD. So talk a little bit about how that got started, and you don't have to give us specifics on it, on
Sure.
who it was and all that, but
Right.
I'd love to hear about it.
So the Veterans Association of America, the VA, has an art contest every year for veterans. And it's everything from singing, dancing, music, musician playing, those types of things, to stand-up comedy. But they also have an arts section, painting, sculpting, a myriad number of different kinds of arts. So I had entered the contest last year with a painting and a sculpture, and my sculpture won the regional event, and then was sent to Washington, D.C. They don't tell you how you come in, but I didn't win. So, and this year I put it in again, and I won, and it's been sent to Washington. But the art director in the Minneapolis VA looked at it, and she was really intrigued by it, and she said, you know, that could be something interesting that vets could do, working with the kind of medium that I work with, and it could be a piece of the therapy, the art therapy that's going through. And they do things like blacksmithing and art, and you know, they do pictures of depicting themselves, those types of things. And it's all part of therapy, especially for veterans and even some active duty people who have gone through some really, really difficult times. And you know, and it's a quick commercial, but there's over, right now, about 1,000, or I'm sorry, one vet is dying every week, suicide. So anything the VA can do to really help them get well, piece of their therapy, both physiologically and psychologically, they're looking for to help. So that's the program. And what I suggested, because I do, you know, figures for competitions and those types of things, I thought it'd be, you know what, cool idea if we have these vets and people work on these kinds of things to depict themselves, what they went through, the uniforms they wore, you know, if they were operators, as an example, with the beard and, you know, those types of things. So I get the specific uniforms they are. If they're a Marine, a MARSEC as an example, or a SEAL, or you know, an Army soldier, we get their exact uniform. We put the kinds of kit that they carried, the weapons that they carried, and they actually make when they leave, a statue of themselves.
Why? Why themselves?
I want them. My theory is, and it's my theory, but it's also this. The VA is starting to come around to it too. Is, you know, your self-worth oftentimes is being a veteran, but that gets abrogated at times because of the situation you've gone through. You know, and it's gone from boy gung-ho to what the hell have I been doing for the last 15 or 20 years? And a lot of these guys are senior guys. So I want to show them, you have not only have you done something worthwhile, but let's depict you doing that something worthwhile. So 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, you can see your children or grandchildren and say, you know, this is me. This is what I served in our country. I was a tip of the spear, as an example, or, you know, I was in the infantry, I was a helicopter pilot, and this is what I looked like at that time. And you know what? I'm really proud of this. And I made this myself. Put it together myself, painted it myself. It's me. So, you know, you walk away with a much more, I think, introspective piece about yourself. And it also gives you a creative outlet. You know, quite honestly, some of them look like Picasso painted them. Other ones look like, they've done a really, really good job, or very thoughtful job. So far, I've gotten great feedback on it. So it's a relatively new program. We've only been doing it for about 2 months. But again, we're getting great feedback from it. So that's why I do it.
Something to think about with that then would be, well, first of all, how long does it take for one of these to be made?
It takes quite a bit. So when I do it professionally, it could take a week to do a figure, because these are really, you've seen the figures, really detailed figures. But you can also do a pretty quick job, a pretty decent job, probably in about 7 or 8 hours.
So if somebody was watching this that was struggling with PTSD or any mental issues whatsoever related to their service or whatever it may be, could they, in theory, then pick up and make a figure at home?
Yes, they could. Absolutely, they could. It's a great point. There's a lot of places online where you can buy figures. Mm-hmm. I would suggest starting out, figures go anywhere from this tall to this tall, to like the G.I. Joe kind of dolls. With one vet that I know, matter of fact, I just talked to him the other day. He has done incredible work changing G.I. Joe dolls, this tall, into beautiful, beautiful works of art.
I've seen those.
Yeah. So there's, and I'm in 1/16 scale is what I'm doing right now. It's about this tall. It gives you enough to paint detail, and you can paint eyes. You've got blue eyes, you can paint blue eyes, that type of thing. So, but it's really therapy. And I'm finding when I'm sitting down with these guys and we're starting to paint, and I talk them about shading and those types of things, they really get into it. It's like you get like a Zen moment, and you start looking at that and you say, okay, what does my face really look like? What does the sun do to my face, the shading and those types of things? What does my beard kind of look like? So, and you find that they really get into it, as well they should. I would say 95% get into it. There's always a 5% that was, what are we doing here? But anyway, it's therapeutically, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I have no idea if there's a long-term effect, but I know they really enjoy doing it. And again, we're working with them to really change their mindset. Most of these guys are going back into the world, the workforce. Mm-hmm. So we don't want them to go back carrying a whole bunch of baggage if we can. We want to help them, give them as many kind of things that they can look back on in this program at the VA and say, you know what, that really, really helped me.
I think a lot of this, too, is important to talk about how you can have that solitude, right, or that one-on-one time with yourself, correct, make something, and not have it be a negative, right? Because I feel like a lot of guys struggle when they're alone, and they almost prefer that with some of the guys that I've met in the past that had a lot of traumatic stress issues, isolate themselves, and then that ends up being a net negative for them. So this almost gives them a way to make more of that time, that alone time, and not have it be, a bad thing.
That's a great point. A big knock on Vietnam vets, when they came back, they became, as you said, isolated, the Rambo kind of living up in the mountains in a little shack or something like that. A lot of people felt isolated because of the fact that they were in Vietnam and, the political situation that was going on at that time. So you come back and you've done brave things and you've done heroic things for your country, and you come back and you get ostracized. Thank God that's not the case now for these guys coming back. But the way it's different is in Vietnam, as an example with me, we'd go out on operation sometimes 5, 6, 7 days and really never get into combat. Or if you did, you'd have helicopters coming in to reinforce it really quick and everything. Now, these guys are going out every single night in Afghanistan and Iraq, every night. And not just once, they're doing it 2, 3, 4 times a night. So and a lot of the guys that I'm working with have been in 15, 20 years. It changes you from a physiological standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, you rely on each other incredibly, much more so than any civilian thing goes through, even cops. They don't go through the psychological pressure that these guys have endured In some cases, some of the guys I work with, I think the least was 7 tours. I've worked with guys with 15 to 16, 17 tours for their country, and never knowing if the next door that you kick in is going to have a IED behind it or whatever. The psychological stress, the physiological stress, because believe it or not, shooting a gun all the time, they're finding out now it has CTE kinds of issues with the brain and with hearing, and we all have tendonitis and those types of things too. So again, any way that we can help, that we were never helped as an example after Vietnam, or very rarely helped like that. God bless the VA. I mean, they are really, really exploring a lot of bounds, ways that we can help these guys recover from what they're going through and go out and have, the rest of their productive lives. Because most of these guys are late 30s, early 40s. Yeah. They got the rest of their lives to live. And we want them to be productive, thinking human beings that contribute to society. So.
Yeah. One of the things that I notice, because I on a daily basis, I talk to a lot of special operations guys that either at work or doing this. What I've noticed that they'll struggle with a lot of times is, and this is probably the same with anybody that served in combat, but just the difference in the adrenaline, right? The high octane environment all the time, and then going from that to trying to learn how to relax ends up being really difficult. And I think sometimes that turns into putting so much effort into everything you do, right? Which is usually a good thing. But because you guys are in your profession are so hyper focused and so good at what you do, you almost have to hold yourself to that standard doing other things, that becomes virtually impossible, right? So what are some ways that you feel, or did you have the same struggles, I guess, and then what are some ways that you feel that people could help do that?
We had struggles like that, but up to a point, not nearly as intense as these guys are. And the conversations that I've had with them, even like I said, when we're out in the jungle in Vietnam as an example, you always have to be alert, and you're always tense. You're trying not to walk into an ambush as an example, or whatever that particular patrol was trying to do. But these guys now, they're almost always going out at night. So they have to sleep during the day. Drug issues are becoming a major problem, especially even, with SEALs and Special Forces as an example. Drug use and, uppers and downers and all that, because you're going out every night. It's hard to sleep during the day. You can cover your eyes and everything, but that really doesn't help. So the physiological part of it builds up, especially if you're doing it day after day after day with very little rest in between and that like that. So it's really, I think it's much tougher on these guys now than it ever was on us. Yeah, it was tense for us, not nearly to the point that these poor guys are going through. And I'm saying poor guys because there's not a lot of studies done yet on it. They're starting to be. But the things that they've gone through, as bad as the things that we went through, doesn't compare with what they're going through right now. And there's a lot more facilities and those types of things to address it. But again, people have to understand that these guys have been doing it for 20 years, day after day. And, as I told you before, they're being deployed 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 times. And by deployed, it'd be anywhere from 3 to 6 months in a high, intense, highly physical, highly psychological, taxing environment. So again, God bless the VA. They're doing everything they can to really figure out what is the best way to treat these guys and help them when they get back.
So staying on that topic or that path, I know some of the things that we were going to talk about were related to gear sets, differences between what those guys carried or what they carry now and what you guys did back then. So tell me a little bit about those differences.
Yeah, it's interesting when I talk to especially Special Forces operators or SEALs or people that kind of in my community that I talk to. Some things never change, and some things change a lot. So as an example, when I would go on a 7-day operation, I had World War II load-bearing equipment with me. The reason for that, it held more stuff than the brand new modern kit that the people in the other soldiers in Vietnam wore. So I had like a BAR, the old BAR weapons belt, held a heck of a lot more magazines than those kits. And you'd carry 2 canteens on you and a couple canteens in your rucksack and that, because we'd be going out for 7 or 10 days, and periodically, probably every 4 or 5 days, a helicopter would come in and resupply us with new water and food and stuff, and you continue on going. So we carried a lot of stuff, but it was still relatively light, maybe 40, 50 pounds. These guys now carry just an incredible amount of really cool, high-tech, but heavy kit. Mm-hmm. So that helmet that they wear with the the monocular visions and that stuff, that's $50 to $80 to $100,000. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of equipment, but it does everything but shoot you to the stars. I mean, it's just it's very sophisticated. They carry the kit that they carry. So as an example, where I carried all these canteens, they have a water bladder on the back. They have very sophisticated first aid kits, as an example, that can have tourniquets and all, blood expander and all those kinds of things in it. They have radio equipment. You'll see everybody with the the little mini mic, and then they've got other kind of radios, like sat radios and all that. But an individual soldier is carrying a complete set of communications tools. They all, from the guys that I've talked to, carry 250 to 300 rounds of ammunition on a regular thing, and that gets to be heavy. Then they have all different kinds of kit. Some of it I keep questioning about, what do you do with this or what do you do with that? The training to put all this kit on and use it is incredibly intense too. So mine was much more simple. And mine was more sophisticated in World War II, as an example. And this kit that they wear right now, they told me that ordinarily it's anywhere from between 80 and 100 pounds. The other thing about that is they usually go out one night, they do their operation, and they come back. So it's from everything that I've talked to them about, it's very rare to go out on now these are the special operators, to go out on a 4 or 5 or 6 day mission. Now some do for reconnaissance missions and those types of things, but the vast majority of them are doing, breaking the homes that maybe have ISIS or Taliban or whatever, those kinds of quick in and out types of things, and oftentimes multiple times a night. So,
did you guys carry med kits?
Pardon me?
Did you carry med kits?
Oh yeah,
you did. What was in it?
I still have mine at home, actually.
Really?
Yeah. But it has everything from antibiotics to bandages and it's about that big. And it usually goes on your belt because for whatever reason you got separated from your rucksack, you would still have it on your belt. So there's certain things that you always carried on your belt, even slept in. And then there were other things that you kept in your rucksack, extra ammunition and clothes and those types of things. So,
and obviously one of the biggest differences between now and then is the fact that these guys can usually get shot with a pretty high-powered rifle in their chest and live, right? You guys didn't have that luxury.
Yeah, we didn't go out with plates or anything, and these guys all do now. And it's getting more and more technical. The Kevlar is getting better and, more bulletproof. Their chances of survival of getting hit are a lot higher than it ever was with us, but it should be, obviously. And that's a good, point because it gets pretty heavy too.
So one of the items that is more common now than it was, obviously, than it existed then, is the drone. So talk about I know that was one of your points, was drone combat and how much that's changed, what the battlefield might look like today and in the future.
It's had a dramatic change just in 2 years in the present battlefield, primarily because of Ukraine and Russia. The things that they're doing, especially Ukraine, God bless them, they're taking simple technologies that they found. They were They're starting to lose it a little bit, but they were even more sophisticated and further ahead than the Russians are. Russians are starting to catch up right now because they're seeing how devastating drones can be. I think, looking, at the history of war and those types of things, which I enjoy studying, it's going to dramatically change within the next 2 to 5 years. The war, tanks. I'm not going to say they'll be totally obsolete, but you're putting $1 million tank against a $200 drone that drops an anti-tank on the most easily penetrated part of the tank, which is the top. That's kind of a no-brainer, and you see this all the time now going on in Ukraine, and Russia's getting, they're catching up.
Gaza too.
Gaza is another great example. I just talked to an active duty operator that says that they now have the ability to call up their headquarters behind them and said, I need such and such kind of drain, and they can literally print it right there. Print that drone, and I said drone, and send it up to whoever needs it. So they're all walking around, especially like the regular soldiers now, especially in special forces. They have these little mini drones that are, about the size of your fist almost, and they throw them up, and they're great. They can see through buildings and fly through windows and do the kind of reconnaissance that you would have to, in my time, just go up and, is there anybody in that window? That type of thing.
I know.
It's changing so quickly and so dramatically that everybody's trying to catch up. What do you do when you're sitting in the foxhole and you see 50 drones heading right towards you? High ones, low ones, or even in a tank, and you see 50 drones coming at you. And now this drone swarming.
That I haven't seen.
Yeah, so it's, there was a movie a couple of years ago about the president, his boat, he was out on Chesapeake Bay, and drone swarm came in, and everybody goes, oh, that's kind of BS, right? That's the way it's done now. I mean, that was prescient about where warfare was going. So, and now everybody's looking at swarms, small, almost like little bumblebees. Think about it. You get attacked by a bunch of bumblebees, you're swatting and swearing, and yeah, you get a lot of bumblebees, but a lot of them get you too. And,
wow, that's crazy.
Depending on what they're carrying, usually you're dead pretty quick. And you can't hide. You can't jump in a foxhole. You can go through a building or stuff, or if a building's all broken up, they'll be flying through the windows. I mean, you can't get away.
Some of the videos I've seen of those things, they carry enough explosives to detonate half a building. So it's
easily. They're getting more and more robust, more and more powerful in a much smaller package. So that's scary.
What's wild is, to me, thinking about this is the fact that old school, just the original thought of heroics and using just common sense knowledge, I feel like is what a lot of successful combating of this has been. Because in Gaza, you'll see a guy with flip-flops on run up to a tank and throw a mine in it. That's takes some nuts, some stones, to do something like that, right? And they're doing this with no equipment, no nothing.
Big time.
So,
and I can't laud the Ukrainians enough. I mean, these guys are. It's like coming into Chicago as an example, an enemy coming in, and the kids taking all these things that they know and how to do, and they put together. I mean, these guys in Ukraine have been geniuses in putting together kit that off the shelf that they can find. And turning them into incredibly effective weapons. And, they're using normal kinds of materials. Not only is it effective, but it also scares the hell out of, in this case, the Russians.
Yeah.
From everything I've read, and I try to keep up on what's going on militarily around the world in several different websites and stuff. And Russians are getting a harder time to get people in there in the front lines to do, fight. There's an example of the Koreans. When they came in, it was like 10,000 Koreans that they used to run out, and Koreans being North Koreans, they would run out like they did in the Korean War, and these drones would just pick them off. So unless you're really starting to get used to drone warfare, you're toast. You really are.
Yeah, to the same point, the same classic ingenuity that I've seen that's worked against it is I've seen the Russians using just nets. Like they'll cover an entire road with netting, and run supplies through it.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of them goes off, it's probably going to destroy your netting. But
it's like World War I and World War II are classic examples. You adapt. You started out with these old-time tanks, and you get better tanks and better tanks. And by the end of the war, within 5 years, you've gone from, as an example with airplanes, biplanes, to sophisticated jets in 5 years because you had to. So you're adapting and you're improvising, and same thing's happening now, but in a much higher rate and a much greater technological rate.
Yeah, true. Yeah, netting and shotguns, buckshot from shotguns. I've seen them take down. So it's just wild that they have all these like new tech and new things that they're using, and then people are just using the old shit to work to stop it.
Sometimes the old stuff is still the old stuff, but it's still effective.
Well, speaking of adapt and overcome, special forces, obviously you have to adapt and overcome throughout time to change your tactics and figure out what the best way to do different things is. But without having a true sample size, sometimes, the research becomes you guys, right? So knowing that, what are some examples of when you had to change your tactics or change the way you're doing something because of an event or something you guys heard about?
So the thing that I really admire about Special Forces, and I'm not just talking about Army Special Forces, I know the SEALs, MARSOC, all the special operators, no matter where they're from, basically do the same thing. They do really, really rigorous pre-planning and training, depending on what the target is, time frame and all those types of things. But also after every mission, ordinarily, at least when I was there, and I'm sure with these guys now, first thing they do is do an after action. What do we do right? What do we do wrong? How do we change it? What tactics did we see that we didn't expect? What tactics are we anticipating? So you're constantly evolving, and you can never let that kind of inherent technology, the lessons that you're learning, the experiences that you're learning, go to waste. So you make sure that it gets, not just with your team, it gets dissipated to all the other teams. Hey, we saw a new kind of innovative IAD when we broached this area, or we saw a different kind of weapon that we've never seen before. Or the tactic we used to have the way kick down the door. Now they're putting IADs behind it, so maybe we ought to think another way of getting into that building, those types of things. But they're constantly innovating and changing tactics. Because as soon as you become static and do the same thing over and over again, they're going to figure that out and use it against you.
Do you remember any specific instances like that where you guys had to change either an insertion method or like I know one could be with the helicopters doing fake drops, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah, so in our patrols especially, we would try to insert either right at last light or past that if we were doing it at night. But the helicopters would always go in without lights. This is in Vietnam. And then they would always pick 2 or 3 or 4 likely drop zones to put you in. So you get out of the helicopter, you'd get in a defensive circle. Now I'm talking about a small patrol. Bigger patrols with multiple helicopters, totally different tactics. And then the helicopter would continue to go on and drop so that, in theory, the enemy would have no idea of which of 5 potential drop zones you would do. But even they were starting to catch on. So when I was there in '69 and early '70, by that time there was very few drop zones that you could go in like that. So that was almost those kinds of patrolling. Even the SOG guys who were going across the border, it was getting harder and harder and harder to do it because the North Vietnamese were adapting and adopting, and they had a lot of primitive approaches. But they learned their lessons pretty well, pretty quickly too.
So talk to us about the Montagnards and a little bit about their background. How did they get involved in the war? And did you learn about that while you were there, or is this something that you read up on later?
Well, before we go over, you get very, especially in our teams, the special forces, you get very intense training and understanding of cultural issues that you're going to be dealing with. If you're going to be dealing with Montagnards, which tribe of Montagnards are you? Because they're like great analogy is the American Indians. You had the Sioux, you had the Apache, and they were all different. They had reactions. Some hated each other, some loved each other. Depends. So these guys, the thing that I know Americans loved working with them, they were intensely loyal. Intensely loyal, where you may not have necessarily trusted some of your colleagues, Vietnamese colleagues, you almost universally trusted the Montagnards. There was always maybe a 5 or 10% thing that you would always keep in the back of your mind, just in case. But for the most part, they were intensely loyal. I told you the time I got wounded, the Montagnard is the one that came and pulled me back in and saved my life.
So tell us a little bit about that again, just as a refresher.
Yeah. So I was in a thing called a fire base, which is usually it's an American-held artillery base with several cannon on it, and special forces often, depending on where the fire base is, would go in and provide security for it. So I had 100 guys providing security for this base. A new guy was coming in to replace me with his Montagnards. In his case, he had a different tribe. He had Cambodians. So I offered to take them out and give them the lay of the land. So I gave them, like a half a day orientation about avenues of approach, streams, all those types of things that they should know about, that they should be aware of, and they should be continually monitoring those types of things. But I brought my radio operator with me and my interpreter, and we took the Cambodian unit out with an American sergeant. So we walked into an ambush that was being set up for somebody else, we think. So it wasn't like a direct ambush on us, it was against somebody else. But it was enough that they set off a mine and knocked me out, killed my radio operator, and killed the Cambodian that was in front of me. But I was unconscious and I had been wounded in the head. So my interpreter, who hadn't been hit, he came running over and dragged me back. And we weren't that far from the fire base. So it wasn't like he carried me miles or anything like that. It was probably 150 yards back, to a safe area. So, and then as he was pulling me back, I became conscious again. But I had been wounded in the head, so I had blood all over it. It looked like, I'm sure the Cambodians looked at me and said, he's dead.
Yeah.
So, anyway. That's the kind of fierceness that they had with Americans. The fierce, not only dependence on the Americans, but the fierce loyalty to the Americans. And these guys were making nothing. Rice maybe, and a couple pittance of food and those types of things to take care of them and their families and everything. But again, they were intensely loyal. Now you have to understand the Montagnards. The analogy that I use is they're like the American Indians versus the guys coming out, from the east and settling the country. They were ethnically different from the Vietnamese. They look very Filipino, as an example. Very strong, small, 5'5", 5'6" for the most part. But again, raised in the jungle, almost always barefoot until we gave them boots. Very simple clothes, loincloths. Again, the analogy to American Indians is very, very similar. They killed what they ate. They did harvest, strip farming all over. They planted crops in an area for 2 or 3 years until the nutrients ran out, and then they moved to 20 miles away to another strip. They cut it down, they built their own houses, and it's an incredibly interesting culture to watch.
What made them want to fight the North Vietnamese in the first place? How did that start?
Well, it's not just, unfortunately in that case, it's not just the North Vietnamese, all Vietnamese. So the North Vietnamese especially had no truck for them at all. They massacred villages, they burned villages down.
Why? Just because they were different people?
Because they were different, and they were very independent. They were like the Indians. Why did the Indians fight the settlers that were coming? It was for the same reason. This is my land. I've been here for 1,000 years or 500 years, and you're coming in and you're taking it over and building a banana plantation or whatever the situation was. It's the same deal. And I want to say they hated each other, about as close to hate as you can possibly get between the two ethnicities. And again, and I'm sure I never saw it, but I'm sure some Montagnard tribes disliked each other strongly.
Well, yeah, I know American Indians had tribal wars that
all
were
the time.
vicious,
Yeah.
where to the point where they would wipe out entire bloodlines. They wouldn't even let if it was a
Exactly.
male, it wouldn't live. So,
And I never heard the Montagnards doing that.
yeah, but I wonder, did you ever have any situations where you didn't know that two tribes hated each other, and then you had them cross paths?
Well, I'll tell you a situation that was actually, I think it was in Life magazine. So way before I got there, and I want to say it was in '65. So the Montagnards had a movement, I think it was called a Furu, I could be off on that. So a lot of them, we kind of picked the leaders for the Montagnards, but that wasn't necessarily their leadership. So sometimes we'd have a Montagnard lieutenant, as an example, in our CID troops. And he wouldn't even be the leader. The leader would be some corporal or sergeant like that, who really led it, but just never let us know that. So the story is that a drunken Vietnamese sergeant came out and was drunk and shot up in the air, but accidentally shot a Montagnard in the leg. So the Montagnards stormed the team house, took all the Vietnamese captured, tied them up with barbed wire on a flagpole, and said, they're out of here. So, and they told the Special Forces guys, do not come out of the team house. So the Special Forces guys were in that team house, I think what the story is, a day or 2 days, until a helicopter came in and took them out. And you may want to cut this out when I say this. They also,
well, we're uncensored, my friend.
Oh, okay.
Say whatever you want.
Supposedly cut the heads off of the guy that shot and another guy, another sergeant, threw him down in the latrine. So,
Brutal.
yeah, yeah. You don't want to piss them off. I mean, they're very loyal, and we had fun with them. They laughed, and we didn't have fun necessarily with the Vietnamese,
Yeah.
or counterparts. So we had a Vietnamese Special Forces team that was always off on leave or out somewhere else, or so. I don't think I ever saw more than maybe 3 or 4 Vietnamese, LLDB, I think is what they were called, enter camp at any given time. So.
And they were supposed to be the ones that cared about what was going on.
Exactly, exactly.
Let's see. One of the things that we have in here is Mad Dog Schreiber.
So there was a sergeant in MacSOG, which is, it was a classified unit out of Bamituit. They were out of 3 different locations, Bamituit, Kontum, and Pleiku, I believe, who would go across the border. In our case, the team from Bamituit would go into Cambodia. I think Khartoum would go into Laos and sometimes Cambodia, and then the northern camp would go into North Vietnam, do recon missions and those types of things. I think they were only allowed to go within 20 kilometers of the border, but obviously there are teams that went beyond that. So there was a guy named Schroeder, I can't remember his first name, but he was nicknamed Mad Dog Schroeder, because he stayed in Vietnam for several years, I think at least 3 or 4 years, and really went what they go native. So as an example, rather than living with the Americans, he'd live down in the Montagnard villages or, those types of things. Supposedly had a Montagnard wife or whatever. And he was a very kind of interesting kind of guy. would go off, sometimes by himself, to his own little mini operation. He was very well respected by the troops, both the American and the Montagnards who were with him, and even the Vietnamese respected him too. But he just probably stayed, and I don't know the guy, I only know him by reputation and by stories, but he probably stayed 1 or 2 tours.
What was
Too much.
what was the name, or what was it exactly what happened with how he like left during an engagement and then?
Yeah, so they, from what I understand, from what I've read, they had a major engagement. Again, they were in Cambodia, and they were surrounded and they were fighting, and was a very heroic guy. He had no fear, from what I've read, no fear at all. But I think the story was that they were surrounded, and one of the things you're supposed to do is charge into the enemy, try not to retreat. And oftentimes when you charge into them, you surprise them, and you overcome them. So, but he went on his own. So supposedly the last anybody saw him or heard him was he was charging into the enemy, and they could hear the sounds of guns. But the Americans and the other Montagnards were moving backwards, and he was giving them time to escape. But nobody ever saw or heard from him again. So they're assuming it was KIA.
Really?
But they don't know. There were all these rumors about 30 years later, this mysterious American walks out of the jungle. Whether that will ever happen, I don't know. But he had a kind of classic reputation amongst, everybody knew Mad Dog Shriver. First of all, it was like kind of a cool name, right? How can you not remember Mad Dog Shriver? And there were other people like that, that stayed years in Vietnam, and just, turned native for whatever reason, wound up doing their own things.
So one of the questions I was going to ask you is, given your life experience and seeing some of the things that are going on in the world today, what are some words of wisdom you'd give to the younger generation in any facet of life? Just some differences that you notice between people that grew up around the same time you did versus now, and maybe something that you feel they should know or.
The number one thing is get involved. Drop the stupid goddamn telephone and iPad, and then and your mind turning into mush, talking to people that you've never seen that are artificial, and having a love affair with an artificial AI, cartoonish looking woman, and sitting up in your room, God knows what you're doing up there in the room. And it appalls me. I've got 4 kids of my own. My 3 grandchildren, and I love them to death, but they're always on the computer or the iPhone, or they're watching a stupid show on TV. Or very, like when I was a kid, and even I'm sure when you guys were kids, you would go out and you'd play, it's stupid, but play Cowboys and Indians and guns, and you would build go-karts, and you would build soapboxes, and you would take your bikes, and you would leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and come back 8 o'clock at night, and your mother and father never knew where you were. And you were having fun. You were climbing trees and skipping rope and doing all those kinds of things kids do. That's all gone. And it blows me away. And the kids don't seem to be necessarily having fun. I go to my kids all play, grandkids all play sports. And I go to the sports thing, and I'm seeing fathers, spending thousands of dollars on sending their kids to go to camp. And the kid goes, I hate this frickin' baseball. Yeah. And I'm not good at it, and I'm swinging at it. Billy, you're going to get it. I know you're going to get it if I spend another $2,000 and send you to this baseball camp down in Missouri. I know you're going to get better. It's just, and I'm as responsible as anybody for that. But it's changed so dramatically, and I'm 80 years old, so 60, 70 years ago when I was growing up, it was just totally different.
Yeah.
You would come in, I'd play in the dirt all day, and dirt streaming down my face, and scrape knees and
I heard somebody recently actually say that my generation, so I'm 33, Elijah's a lot younger than I
The
am.
underwear I'm wearing tonight is older than you.
So, but I've heard somebody recently say that my age group is the last one that grew up without cell phones. Isn't that a crazy thought?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And I still had one. I had one late. I remember my parents wouldn't let me have one until I was like 15.
And that's a point I'm trying to make with my two sons who one has one, one has three, is they grew up without cell phones. And they were always outside my house playing. Very rarely did they spend any time indoors. And they were obviously never on devices. Really didn't watch TV because we wouldn't let them until after, 5 or 6 o'clock after dinner or something like that, after homework was done. The traditional things the parents did at that time. But now you have no idea what your kids are watching. None. No idea what they're doing. No idea what they're doing behind closed doors up in their bedrooms and talking to whoever they could be talking to.
Yeah.
And as a parent or grandparent, it's really, really scary. And parents now are oftentimes so busy with their own stuff going on that these kids are, what do they call them, lockdown kids, that type of thing.
Yeah, I don't think that it was the first thought when some of this technology was made, but now I think a lot of it has turned into the ability to turn those kids into future workers, right, that are just going to do nothing but produce on whatever they need to do and then have no other engagement, right, because they're so robotic that you just basically their whole life is just going to be to work and make enough to where they have an apartment somewhere and then die, right? So it almost programs them to not think for themselves if you think about it. And it could be, I don't think the original thought process behind these things were that, but now it's advanced to the point where there's people saying now that in the future our kids aren't even going to know the difference between a virtual world and the real one because your emotions are so dull.
Exactly.
that human connection is no longer something that concerns you, right? So I don't know what the answer to backpedal that is, but I do think that's a fair point.
It's actually a great point because I've sat down just recently with my two grandsons, and one's in 7th grade and one's in 9th grade. And they're okay students, but they're lackadaisical with homework and the students, and they spend much, much, much more time on cell phones and iPads and playing games. And I've been reading a lot of it, and AI scares the living crap out of me because probably within 3 years, everything I'm reading it could be prescient, which means AI thinks for itself, and the more they're starting to think for themselves, the less human beings are really being needed, or the less kinds of jobs that will be available. So what I was telling them, I hate to tell you this, but you can no longer be a kid after the 7th grade. You got to really start thinking about what you want to do when you grow up and what kind of skills you're going to need and how you're going to have to study for it and what you're going to have to do to be successful. Because by the time you both graduate high school, which is several years away, there's not going to be a lot of the same kind of jobs. Matter of fact, almost all those kinds of jobs that are going to be gone. Anything that's repetitive or anything that's technologically, needed is going to be gone. And AI is going to be thinking for you. So you better have the kinds of skills, whether it's being a doctor, and even that is going to be very tough. Doctors are going to be a lot fewer because technology is going to take over a lot of the things that doctors do. So you have to have a kind of skill, and I don't necessarily know exactly what that should be, but you ought to at least start thinking about 5 years from now, what am I going to need to get into college? And when I get out of college, what kind of skills am I going to need to be a thriving human being?
Yeah.
Because if AI is doing everything, what am I going to do? Sit and continue to play games and have my mind go into mush?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, makes you wonder. And I guess that leads me into one other question that I had, and that's was Elijah's idea actually. But what's one conspiracy theory that you believe is true?
It's a very good question. Well, I know Kennedy's still alive because I saw him in Akron about 3 years ago.
Who?
JFK.
No.
He didn't die in Dallas. I'm being facetious.
Yeah, I was like, what?
I know
How do you know it was him?
I saw him. But he had a mustache and he's bald now, but I know it was JFK. That's funny you say it, because I know there are conspiracies. I know but I don't want to fall back on, okay, the flying saucers coming down, take this guy away. Unfortunately, we are falling into too many conspiracy theories. This Charlie Kirk thing that unfortunately happened
I was
here.
just going to bring that up.
There's thousands of different conspiracy theories about what happened to this poor guy.
I'll tell you, I don't think that what they're saying happened.
Yep.
Because of several reasons. One being, when I saw the CCTV footage, I watched it in a quarter speed of the guy jumping off the roof and noticed, like, if you look real close at it, and it's really hard to tell, but there's points where it almost seems like it's two videos, because you'll see, like, the way he's running, it's almost like it skips frames, and then the shadows disappear in the second frame, right? Almost like they're splicing something in, or it's a generated video, or it's doctored. I don't know for sure, but it's just a little weird. And the fact that he didn't have a rifle in his hands, and the time frame between the shot being fired and the guy jumping off the roof was supposedly 48 seconds. So you mean to tell me this guy stripped a bolt-action rifle, jumped off the roof in 43 seconds or 48 seconds, and then put it back together and threw it in a bush? You know what I mean? It's just, a lot of it is just really odd. But I don't know what's true, what's not, obviously.
See, it first happened actually with JFK's killing, with the Magruder films, and all of a sudden, I'm sure there was conspiracy theories before that, but that just blown up.
What was that?
The shooting of Kennedy.
Yeah, but what was the theory that came out of that?
There was
When
multiple
was it?
theories.
Yeah.
There was multiple shooters. There was, a shadowy guy up in the park, and there was, how could a guy do a bolt-action rifle 3 times in 6 seconds or whatever the time frame was, with an accuracy of a very inaccurate kind of. It was all the same stuff that are coming up now. And people are putting stuff up their ass saying, this is this and that's that.
That was happening back then?
Oh, yeah.
That's
it was
fun.
called the Magruder Files. It was unbelievable. There was
Love it.
there was congressional meetings and committees for years afterwards. The file, when it was released, was supposed to be at least 6 inches thick, which is like 1,000 pages of the investigation of it. And people still said it was bullshit.
Did they
And
just declassify that, though?
They had film. They had film of him being shot. And this is way before digital enhancement and all that kind of stuff. So in the films, 8mm films.
I've seen that. That looks very real.
Yeah, but not nearly as real as the new stuff does. And with AI, I can
Scary.
I can see Trump walking right up behind Charlie Kirk, up on the roof, shooting him in the head, and then turning around and running away. With AI can do that. And AI can make people look like they're doing something that they have,
Imagine what that's going to do
ludicrous.
for crime.
Pardon me?
I said, imagine what that could do for crime in general.
Oh,
Say you were the person that shot Charlie Kirk and then framed this guy or whatever. You just never know. It's that doable, or it's that real. It's getting to that
It's
point.
conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
You never know. Trust me. For this next year, at least, with the Kirk issue as an example,
Yeah.
there's going to be tons of conspiracy theories. Why? Who did it? Why did they do it? Left wing, right wing. It's just nuts.
I think that's all just made to divide people anyway. The
course.
two-party system. It's all
And
it does.
that's the other thing that I fear, especially for my grandchildren, is yes, there was always Republicans and Democrats before, and they ranted back and forth who's better, who's worse, and that type of thing. But they were never really. I've never, up until roughly the Clinton era with Newt Gingrich and that whole crowd, I never really saw people attack each other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, they may attack one person like McCarthy or something for doing something really ludicrous, but I never saw the venomness that I see now, and that scares the crap out of me. He's an older guy, and it's getting worse. Now, you know, when I was growing up, and I never dabbled in politics, but my parents did a small bit. And yes, you would argue Democrat, Republican, and our senators would argue back and forth. But at night, they'd all go out and have cocktails together and, you know, settle issues behind the scene and do what we actually elected them to do and got work done. Now it's virtually impossible. If I get something settled, then you have to look like an idiot.
Do you think that happens because of how focused and glued to screens people are now? That
Absolutely.
The actual,
I think it's part of it.
you know, because it almost seems like, because you are intelligent enough to where you speak with people and have conversations and judge them based on character, based on that, right? As a, you know, I feel a lot of people are, but there's a like set of people in on both sides of politics and in general that at this point assume so much about somebody before they ever meet them,
Absolutely.
right? You can't just base somebody's morality or how they are as an individual on a political agenda or whatever,
Yeah.
you know. So that venom is coming from them actually being programmed to think a certain way. They're not talking to the person and finding out, hey, is this guy a piece of shit or is he a decent guy? I mean, usually that's how you do it, you know.
You know, that's the thing. We're making assumptions about people that aren't necessarily there. Just because you said, like, I'm a very conservative Republican, you know, if I'm kind of a liberal person, I could say, yeah, this guy's an asshole. He doesn't want to hear anything I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
He's, you know, for against everything that I stand for. And I'm sure you're thinking the same exact thing about me. And how are we ever going to get along? We're not.
Right.
And oftentimes you don't even take the time to know me or understand me. And I don't take the time to do the same thing to you.
Yeah,
And
takes
you
a back seat.
Right. So it's, you know, the great thing about the Army, and it's not in all cases, but in most cases, we're in the foxhole together. And you're black and I'm white, and you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat. You know, that's not in the foxhole. You know, you're here to save my life, I'm here to save your life. And I will give my life up for you, and you will give your life up for me. And that's just kind of a de facto understanding that we have. So, you know, that no man left behind kind of quote. But that really is the way. Not in all the cases, but I would say 90 to 95% of the cases. I've seen guys give their lives to run out and drag in a wounded guy and then get shot and kill themselves. And another guy go out and get them.
When did that happen?
Well, it happened in Vietnam.
Can you tell us that story? Because I don't know.
It was actually 2 Montagnards. You know, one Montagnard got shot.
Where were you?
We were up in we were in Tuatar, I think.
Well, talk us through the whole thing, because now we're...
Yeah, so we had an operation. So my camp, there was 7 border camps and 1 inland camp. By inland, we were about 40 cliques in a valley, and that was my camp, because it was an old French kind of fort from years ago. But there was no roads in or out, just a valley. So, but because we were inland and we're relatively in a safe area, almost all of our operations were along the border, in working with the other camps. So we were in a firefight, probably August of '69, and our lead. So we were on a patrol along 100 guys, 2 Americans, and the lead scout was killed. So shot. So the second guy, rather than, you know, and we laid down a field of fire, but he ran out and grabbed the guy and was pulling him back by the LBE, and he got shot. And a third Montagnard ran out, and he pulled him back, the first guy back, and he pulled the second guy. He got wounded, but he still very heroically pulled his second guy back in there. So, And countless events of Americans doing the same thing with each other. Giving up your life for your buddy or running out. You leave no man behind. You never want to leave anybody behind. And then, unfortunately, it may cost you your life, and then the life of the guy behind you trying to save you. Then it adds up, and that's when you have to make very bad decisions. But so,
Yeah. No hesitation with those guys at all. Huh?
none.
Wow.
And it would be, the same with Americans. You wouldn't leave your guy out there. You'd go out and get him and drag him back. And they would expect it. Sometimes, one of the, and I never saw it, but one of the things they would do is like wound a guy, so that, and there was an old, I think the Japanese did that too. So then 2 guys would go out to get him, and they would wound those 2 guys, and then 5 guys could go out to them, and it adds up pretty quickly.
They fight. So a lot of that sounds like they're fought pretty intelligently, for the most part.
Oh yeah,
against you guys at all
never,
times. Right?
Ever think the guys you're fighting against are idiots.
Of course.
They're not. And they could be, in our case, and I tell people this, North Vietnamese, they were my enemy, but I also highly respected them. They would, come at you in waves, knowing that they were going to die. And I'm sure they were frightened to death, obviously, but they kept doing it. And they were courageous, they were brave, as courageous and brave as any Americans. As any Germans, I'm sure, were in World War II, or Russians, or, For the most part, when people fight, and you're fighting with your own guys cohere together and really support you, and you support them, and, you're going through all the same crap. So you give up your life for them, they'll give up their life for you. So it's just part of war.
Yeah.
Just like I'm sure you two would do with each other, filming people that you don't like to film, and he has to drag you away. Don't ask him that question.
Yeah, I know. Speaking of, just last thing that I have that I think is relevant, just because you just said Russians, and we're talking about all this stuff with this programming and stuff. Well, 2 things. One, do you feel that there's any parallels between like communist Russia and some of the stuff that's going on now, almost using political ideas to push violence and then eventually use that to overturn another political party? So I've heard some comparisons drawn to that, and I feel like it's an interesting concept, like history repeating.
I'm not quite following the context. You meaning in Russia or Russians?
Yes.
Okay.
So in Russia, during the Bolshevik Revolution, right, they would use politics or an ideology, a communist ideology, and they would take people that were easy to convince and have them carry out acts of violence against their political rivals, right? Which eventually turned into the Soviet Union. So do you see any parallels between that type of behavior and then now with what we're seeing?
Yeah, I think now, I have to say the Russians squandered their opportunity when the Iron Curtain came down. And the oligarchs came in and swept up all these resources and stuff and became little mini power bases in themselves. In some cases, very powerful power bases in themselves. And they allowed Putin really to rise up through the ranks as a middle kind of manager in the KBG, to become leader of a very vast, mineral-rich, people-rich kind of country like that. And it's a kind of a wake-up call for us. No matter what your political persuasion is. In my case, I think there's some people that could take us there easily. And literally every time I'm opening up my computer and watching the news, some outrageous breach of normalcy and etiquette, political etiquette that has guided us to be where we are as a free, democratic nation, is being eroded. The judicial system is where it used to be. Supreme Court was like 78% of Americans approved of them. I think they're now down to 17, 18%. Ludicrous. Where I always knew that, America always had the best, our presidents and politicians would have the best interests in us. No, I don't feel that way at all anymore. There's all this interesting infighting. There's all this, I win, you lose type of situation. There's no, let's you and I sit down. And it happens from time to time, and I get encouraged by that. But let's sit down, you and I, you Republican, me Democrat, and let's figure out how this thing works.
That's what's so insane about the Charlie Kirk thing, right? The guy was going to college campuses and having discussions, right? And then gets killed for it. I mean, that's like,
yeah,
and he's talking in places obviously where he knows that people aren't going to agree with him. So that's
Right.
probably not the safest thing to do in the first place. But it's the thought that you could be speaking about something, whether you believe in it or not.
Yeah, I didn't agree with him, but I give the kid kudos. He had the chops to go doing exactly that. He went on hostile campuses in some cases, and he was glib, he was quick, he's obviously very smart. And I've seen some rising Democratic stars be the same way, and some conservative stars, and that's great as long as they can talk about issues without demonizing each other.
Right. I mean, and you're driving the youth to have conversations instead of doing it on the internet.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
no, anybody that can get out in front of kids, especially, and debate is obviously out the window in schools. I don't even know if they have debate teams anymore. But the ability to sit down across from somebody you totally disagree with, and have arguments, give your side, and they give their side, and then you counter and you go back and forth. But at the end of the day, you still respect each other. You may even go out and have a Coke or a beer or something like that, or not. But at least I'm not demonizing you, saying
Right.
what a total jerk you are.
do you trust your government? The federal government?
Not as much as I did in the past. I really don't. Because some of the stuff I'm seeing, and especially because, I'm a retired Army guy, and I'm looking at the military right now, and this guy, Hesketh, whatever his name is, all these generals and stuff that he's firing, like the Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff, and the Air Force guy, and a woman that was in charge, I think, of the Coast Guard and stuff like that. No rhyme or reason. If there were valid reasons for it, absolutely do it. But he seems to be going through with the swaths like, I was a captain, all you guys shit on my head when I was here, so I'm going to get you now. That doesn't seem to be a logical reason for a lot of the things that he's doing.
Yeah.
He's bringing in, 800 generals and admirals next week. God knows what it's for.
Yeah.
But it could very well be like the Hunger Games.
Well, what about, trust them as in how they inform you. Do you think that they're telling you the truth?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Everybody lies.
Yeah.
But everybody lies. Now they can lie and put an artificial intelligence thing up to show that Kennedy is not dead. Really, that bullet grazed off, and Jackie was in on it too.
Yeah, right.
They're living in Bimini right now.
So last point that I have that I always think is interesting, and I wanted to get your input on. And one of the conflicts that I love studying is the Chechen Wars.
Yes.
And Grozny in specific.
Yes.
I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that being an entire Russian, I think it was division, right? That armor division that went there, and the expectation was a one-day
Yep.
over and done with, and they ended up being slaughtered by rebels there.
Yep.
Do you, knowing what you know about working with indigenous people and that are fighting for their country and so on, what do you think gave them the advantage? Was it mostly just because they're fighting for their home, or is it because of the tactics?
The combination of things. Yeah, absolutely. But it wasn't necessarily all the people in Chechnya doing it. There was a very hardcore group of, the guy with the red beard, I can't think of his name right, the head of Chechnya.
Yeah. They were foreign fighters that came in.
Right,
and helped?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And he had Muslim insurgents, from everything I read from him, fought in Afghanistan and fought in Iraq and those types that came back and reinforced him. But the Russians came in very, we had the Red Scare when I was growing up. Oh, Russia's on the border, and they've got all these tanks and airplanes and all that stuff. And they did, but it was like a paper tiger too. The troops were very, very ill-paid, ill-treated. Morale was terrible, all that kind of stuff. And that's, I think, a big part of what happened when they did invade. They went thinking, well, the Russians, they're going to run and hide up in the hills and stuff. No, they didn't.
I think that's what the generals thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and the guys didn't, from everything I've read, there was a high desertion rate, a high shooting superior officers kind of rate. So they were doing as much damage as the rebels were doing to their own people.
Yeah, I know the first
hand. And Chechens, everything I've read, can be very, very vicious.
Oh yeah,
people.
Absolutely. I know the first-hand account that I read was a conscript. It was actually a crazy story because the guy that wrote this book, I'll have to send it to you someday, but he fought in both wars and was a conscript the first time.
Right.
And detailed his experience there. It's like, I think his whole unit was a conscript unit, so these guys are just forced to go there in the first place.
Yeah.
So they came in all ego heavy, and now they're just, some of those stories are just crazy, just being there in the middle of the night, and they have, blown out holes in all the buildings so they could drop through floors and do all kinds of,
yeah.
Man, that's terrifying shit.
It's a Grozny, I think, is the city. It was basically a very attractive, beautiful, old city, and a lot of it was destroyed. Now it's built up, and but that warlord is still, he still runs the country.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he sent a group to Ukraine to fight for the Russians.
Really?
So the Russians paid him off and pacified him. So he's their little bitch. All right. He'd never say that, of course.
Yeah.
Don't ever put that on the video because next thing I know, it's like, I opens the door, we have to talk to you. Yeah, okay, judge now. So anyway, but he has been very peaceful with the Russians because he's been paid off.
So it was all money, huh? After that.
Yeah, it's money and power.
Yeah.
Wow. Both.
It hasn't been that long.
Right. Both absolutely, support each other.
Wow.
But he actually sent a group to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians kicked their ass.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I haven't kept up on
kicked the North Korean ass too.
Wow.
I mean, God bless them. They're my collective national heroes.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That the North Koreans part doesn't really surprise me because I don't think that they're trained extremely well over there. So
yeah, and this was their supposedly Special Forces elite.
Yeah, maybe Kim Jong-un trained him himself.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's crazy. The Battle of Kursk happening again is wild. There's just many parallels with that kind of stuff. That's just
see, that's the thing. We never learn. There are parallels. Especially from Vietnam on. You'd say, oh, we'd never make those stupid mistakes. Then we went into Afghanistan. We literally won the war with that Special Forces team and some other ones that went in, and the Northern Alliance came down. They kicked the Taliban out. They kicked Osama bin Laden out. And they were pacifying the whole country. And then Bush and all its whatever decided to invade Iraq, took everybody out. All the trained guys and everything. Yeah, they left a couple in, but not enough to pacify the country. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of washed their hands and said, okay, Afghanistan's done, let's do the same thing in Iraq. They blew that.
War is financially driven too, right? I think in a lot of ways that people don't look at, where there's a reason that we were there that many years. I mean, it wasn't like we were, like on paper, maybe we were accomplishing certain things, right? But somebody's getting rich the whole time.
A lot of warlords got rich, and they're all living in Saudi Arabia or Iran in some cases.
Weapons dealers, ammo manufacturers.
Everything. And opiums.
I recently learned about how much the companies that make like tarps make, just for when they set up, bases and things like that. Those people make hundreds of millions of dollars through war. So
Every government contract is way, way, way
Mm-hmm.
overpriced. And you're right. From things like tarps, which I never even thought about, to munitions, to guns, to uniforms,
armor,
to food,
hazmat,
Yeah.
I mean, anything, you know.
feeding the troops. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cooks were flown in, and tons and thousands of tons of food and
Yeah.
stuff from everywhere.
Everybody always just looks at the political and the human side of it, but then doesn't realize, like,
Right. The logistics side is much, much bigger than the human side in many cases.
Yep.
So,
we've been in conflicts for how many years now,
long time.
right?
And that's why, these Special Forces guys, they've been on the tip of the spear for 20 plus years. Easily.
Unreal.
More than that now. Both in Iraq and places we don't even know about.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So, and they're keeping us safe, but they're paying the price. So,
Talk about the show. What are we doing here, in general?
so it's a show for a bunch of ginky old men like me who still have a affection for toy soldiers from when they were, kids. And toy soldiers were a lot bigger when I was a kid, because World War II had ended, Korean War in my case was going on, when I was 5 or 6, whatever it was. And then, so kids either played Cowboys and Indians or they played Army guy, We all had like fake M1 rifles and cowboy hats and lariats and boots and spurs and stuff for the two different types of venues that we played in. So, I grew up in a time when it was a great time to be a kid. A lot of fun. And I'm sure there was a lot of very bad things that happened to kids too at that time that was never reported, nobody even knew about. But for me, from my own personal experience, unfortunately, I told you guys, my dad died when I was 8. So, I grew up with a single mother, but she was great, always provided for us. And Christmas time was always wonderful. I get toy soldiers and all that stuff too.
So that's what's driven you towards continuing with?
No, it's first of all, I've really enjoyed people that I've met, and I also enjoyed the venue. It's one of the reasons I teach this as part of therapy. Is when you're concentrating, and your mind is really focused on doing something and doing it right, putting an eyeball in, or it sounds silly, but like a button or whatever, particularly fine thing. It's almost like and it's giving the venue too much credit, but it's like a scientist looking at a telescope and seeing something very small and then making something out of that. And a lot of these guys are just incredible, incredible artists. Most aren't, but a lot of, several that are really, really good. A guy named Shep Payne, I don't know if you heard the name. So he's a guy that I started, it was a company called Monogram Models. They and Revell were the two big plastic model pickers. All right. So Shep Payne was an artist and started doing diorama ideas that were included in every model kit. So it was Air Force or like he had B-24 kit as an example bomber, would show you how to make a revampment and how to make a scene with little figures and that kind of stuff. And he just blew that whole business up. His little figures he would do would go for thousands and thousands of dollars.
Really?
On high-end collectors. But he was considered the godfather of miniature figures.
Wow. That's cool.
Look him up. His name is Shepard Payne. He actually lives there in Chicago, and his house is like the Mecca. Guys literally come from all over the world to go to his house.
Oh, I've seen videos of that.
Yeah. And it's a house in a regular neighborhood, has no security on it. And I went to it the first time I went to it. I said, "How come you have like a little lock on your door, and you've got millions of dollars worth of high-end, original Napoleonic uniforms and crevasses and weapons, from the last 300 or 400 years, thousands of books and portfolios, and this house was just as nice as any museum you've ever been into.
That's so
Seriously.
cool.
And he was just a very nice. So I brought him to Minneapolis. God. So it had to be like 82, 83, when the Chicago show was just started probably in the mid to late 70s. And he was just starting to get famous. But he came up, and there was 10 of us in a hobby store there, and he stayed at my house for the weekend, and we painted figures. He showed us how to paint figures in the Shep paint style, which became a very iconic style that everybody used.
Wow. So that's how you learned how to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
Learn from the best.
And you ask any figure painter at all, Shep paint is a god.
Wow.
In the books, I've got all his books and everything. And he was very, very imaginative. So he had, you can look at each one, and it's like looking at a particular Picasso or Michelangelo painting. He had a particular style. You could instantly tell it was a Shep painting.
Wow.
And it always went for big bucks.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Really a neat guy. He died relatively young. I don't even think he was 60. Maybe if he was just 60. So.